All right, welcome back. Today, and by the way, I'm going to ask you to excuse me. I've got several different notes up here on my computer screen. I'll be switching back and forth. You'll notice that. And some texts that I'm going to be referring to, so hopefully that's not too confusing as you can't see those things outside the parameters of this video. But I think we're getting the hang of this together. So far, I want to say very good work on the things that you've done and the comments that you've made. And we're now probably moving into the sorts of issues that we'll be dealing with the confessions that are, quite frankly, somewhat controversial. And even maybe for modern Lutherans, somewhat problematic. As we deal with the question of what do the confessions say about the nature of humanity. This might be a several-part video because I think we're going to need to do a lot of work on this before we can get to the point to truly kind of get a sense of what's happening in terms of the confessional statements that finally end up in the Book of Concord. I need to take you back, if I could, into Luther's works, into Luther's writings. We need to remember, of course, that Luther is not our Pope. Ralph Query, my wonderful professor at Wartburg Seminary, once made the comment to me that Lutherans sometimes give Luther more authority than any Roman Catholic ever gave to a pope. People quote Luther all the time, or things that may have been said around the table at dinner time, as though they are the doctrines of our faith, and these are the things we must believe. In fact, Luther is not the one that we finally point to as our final authority. Yet Luther's thought and Luther's ideas do provide the background and the foundation for the documents that do become authoritative for us. So it's worth it for us to spend a little bit of time in Luther. And before we do that, the reason that we're going to do that is because one of the issues at stake is understanding how Luther approached the question of the nature of humanity after the fall. When Luther talks about human beings, and when he talks about justification by grace through faith in Jesus Christ, right? He's talking about God, but he's also making certain assumptions about human beings. Why is it that we can only be justified by grace through faith in Jesus Christ alone, apart from any of our own works? Why is Luther so insistent upon this? Well, there are a few things that you should probably know. First of all, for Luther, God's will is never contingent on human will. That in order for God to be free, in order for God to have power, human beings can't share in that, right? For God to be free, in a way, we cannot be free. God, cannot sit around and wait for you and I to make the determination that we're going to be in relationship with God, not if God is going to be free, right? In God's freedom, God is the one who determines those relationships. We are justified by grace through faith in Jesus Christ alone, right? Apart from works. It's another way maybe of saying we're justified by a decision that God makes that really isn't contingent upon decisions that you and I make. Which is why it is somewhat problematic for Lutherans to engage a theology that says, have you chosen Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior? I think Luther would say, well, what's the point of even asking that question? What does it matter that you have chosen Jesus Christ? Imagine, for instance, those of you who wish to become either pastors or associate ministries or rostered people in a church. Let's just say that one day you decide that you're going to act like a pastor. You're going to choose, I'm a pastor, or I'm an associate minister, or I am, whatever, fill in the blank. And so you just show up at a church and you begin acting like that, right? And maybe you were even doing a very good job. Maybe you show up at a church and there's no pastor currently serving. So you go to the church and say, hey, I'll tell you what, I'll be the one that's going to provide marital counseling, and I'll be the one who is going to do catechism teaching, and I'm going to be the one who will do the sermons. And let's say you even do those things, and let's say you even do them well. The reality is you're still not the pastor. Right? You're still not the associate ministry. You're still not the diaconal minister or whatever configuration it is that we have in the church today that applies to you. That only happens when an external call says, okay, this is who you are. It's not until a congregation says, you're our pastor, that you get to be one, or you're our associate ministry, or you're our, and again, fill in the blanks for the situations that each one of you are in. The call must be external. Right? We can't simply pretend to be something or assume a role on our own and have that be true. The call, in fact, is external. That's not only true of the way that we organize our church, but this is the way, essentially, that that Luther looks upon our relationship with God. We cannot act a certain way and then assume a certain relationship with God. God must make that decision first. Well, in order to understand this even more, the reality that for Luther, human will is not very important for Luther in terms of our relationship with God, that God's will is finally what is final and definitive, and that God's will is never contingent upon human beings. We need to know a few things. I mean, Luther kind of lays out why this is true. The first thing, and this may come as a bit of a shock to you, and I want to make sure that I get my notes together straight here so that you can reference these things if you'd like. For Luther, are you ready for this? For Luther, after the fall, humanity loses the image of God. We talk about the image of God all the time in the church, right? And that we are created in the image of God, and therefore there are certain consequences for the way that we behave and the ways that we should, think of ourselves and the church and these sorts of things. For Luther, though, this image of God is lost. At one point, he might kind of come back from that a little bit and say, well, it's just so confused and it's so hidden that it's almost as though it's not even there. So in some ways, we might find a little bit of ambiguity in Luther. But if you'd like to find this for yourself, go to Luther's Works, Volume 1, page 27 or so. Maybe it might be his commentary on Genesis 1, verse 27. And he lays this out, that the fall results in our losing the image of God. I mean, that might be shocking to many of you. I know that it was shocking to me the first time I heard it, because we speak of ourselves as created in the image of God and living in the image of God all the time. Let me add as a bit of a caveat here, or maybe a parenthetical statement that we'll get to later. Luther does believe that what God gives us back in Jesus Christ is even better than what we lost during the fall. And so don't lose hope here or anything. But you see now how fundamental Luther sees the kind of the separation between God and humans. That we even lose this image of God that we were created with. And therefore, we really don't have anything to bring to the table. We can't say to God, God, we are going to now act like you want us to act, and we're going to do the things you want us to do, and therefore that's going to determine our relationship. For Luther, God would say, your actions don't matter. What matters is my call to you. So that's the first point. In Luther's anthropology, which is very pessimistic, he has a pessimistic anthropology. He doesn't see human beings as full of all kinds of potential to reconcile ourselves with God. He sees it exactly the opposite. We lose the image of God. And you'll also then see this in the reading from the Augsburg Confession today. But one other thing that I think for most Lutherans is a completely foreign concept. I believe most Lutherans don't even realize that for Luther, this also means that in our relationship with God, we have no free will. For Luther, we have no free will. If you want to check these things out, if you want to make sure that you're kind of hearing something from me that is true, because I bet for some of you this may just sound like I'm from Mars, right? Check out the Heidelberg Disputation that Luther wrote in 1518. Very short little piece, right? And just these theological treatises about what happens as a result of the fall and the relationship between God and humanity, in which he finally says, human beings, in terms of determining our relationship with God, have no free will. We don't have a choice. God's not waiting for us to make a choice, right? If we are to be in relationship with God, it's because God wills it, not because we do. And you can also find this in a more developed way in a text that Luther wrote called The Bondage of the Will. Excuse my phone call, but my secretary will get that. The Bondage of the Will, where Luther lays this out in his debates with Erasmus, right? Where Erasmus is saying, wait, Luther. I mean, you can't possibly mean that there's nothing that we can do in our lives that can please God. I mean, certainly we work with the grace of God. And Luther's response is, Erasmus, at least you get the point. There is no free will, not in terms of our relationship with God. I'm going to say more about this, and I hope that you stick with this. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to stop now and post a second part here so that I can explain this idea of Luther and free will. So give me a second, and we'll see you in a few moments.